Knew it was a tragedy. I got a younger brother, who's a year and a half younger than me. And to lose your mom at 14 is, not easy.
In this video, we take a deep dive into the world of Mary McCartney, daughter of Beatles legend Paul McCartney, as she navigates her own path in photography and filmmaking. Through her lens, Mary explores her father's unparalleled musical legacy, reflecting on the impact of the Beatles and their time at Abbey Road Studios. We'll uncover Mary's personal journey as she brings to life her latest project, a documentary that takes us behind the iconic walls of Abbey Road, where history was made. Along the way, we'll revisit the infamous Paul is Dead conspiracy, dive into the intense rivalry between Paul and John Lennon, and explore the stories that shaped the creative force of Abbey Road. From family bonds to legendary music, this video will connect the dots between Mary's personal narrative and the timeless influence of the Beatles. Mary McCartney was born on August 28, 1969, at the Avenue Clinic in the picturesque St. John's Wood area of London, a location that would set the stage for her extraordinary life. Growing up in an environment that was far from ordinary, Mary was immersed in creativity from the very beginning. She's the daughter of Paul McCartney, the legendary Beatles member, and Linda Eastman, a photographer who made a lasting impact through her work and activism. Together, her parents built a home where art, music, and compassion were at the heart of their family values. Mary's siblings only added to the family's artistic legacy. She is the younger half-sister to Heather McCartney, a talented artist and activist, and the older sister to Stella McCartney, the renowned fashion designer who would go on to revolutionize the fashion industry with her commitment to sustainability. Mary's brother, James McCartney, also followed in his father's footsteps, carving his own career as a musician. Mary also shares a connection with her paternal half-sister, Beatrice McCartney, from her father's second marriage. In this creative household, Mary was not only exposed to art and music, but also to the powerful principles that would shape her worldview. Her parents, both passionate vegetarians, instilled in her a deep respect for animal rights, environmental sustainability, and ethical living. These values, rooted in the McCartney family, shaped much of Mary's early life, leaving a lasting impression that would manifest in many of her later endeavors. Whether it was activism or art, Mary's upbringing taught her that creativity and compassion could go hand in hand. Her mother's activism, especially in advocating for vegetarianism and environmental causes, left an indelible mark on Mary. Growing up, she learned that activism wasn't just about raising awareness. It was about living those values every day. In fact, her family's commitment to a plant-based lifestyle would go on to inspire public campaigns like Meat-Free Mondays, an initiative launched in 2009 by Mary's family to encourage people to adopt a meatless day for the sake of the planet. This project resonated not only in the UK, but around the world, showcasing how the McCartney family's values influenced a broader audience. But Mary's passion for photography came from a different, yet equally significant influence. Her mother, Linda, was a talented photographer who captured moments in time with an emotional depth that resonated with audiences. Linda's work was not only beautiful, but meaningful, as it often focused on themes of love, family, and activism. Mary would eventually follow in her mother's footsteps, becoming a gifted photographer in her own right. Her mother's lens taught Mary the importance of capturing authenticity, which she would later channel into her own projects, particularly when documenting her family and their legacy. Growing up in a household that was simultaneously grounded in the arts and in social causes meant that Mary's creative development was shaped by a combination of these influences. Music, activism, and art were not separate from one another. They were intricately woven into the fabric of her life. For Mary, creativity was always something bigger than just the act of creation. It was a tool for change and expression. While Mary's childhood was filled with moments of personal and professional growth, it also came with its own set of challenges. Living in the public eye meant that her family was often the subject of intense media attention, but her parents, particularly her mother, worked hard to keep things grounded and make sure their children lived as normal a life as possible. For Mary, this balancing act between fame and family life became a foundation for her ability to navigate the pressures of the spotlight in her adult life. As Mary entered her teenage years, she became increasingly drawn to photography, inspired by the powerful images her mother had captured and the stories they told. Mary began to develop her own perspective on what it meant to capture the essence of her subjects, whether they were family, friends, or fleeting moments of beauty. Her work would eventually lead her to opportunities that not only highlighted her creative talent, but also her deep connection to the subjects she chose to photograph. Mary's early life wasn't just about being the daughter of two high-profile individuals. It was about how those influences combined to shape her unique identity. Her parents, with their commitment to the arts and activism, provided a space where Mary could explore her own creative passions while remaining true to the values that had been instilled in her from a young age. Through her parents' example, she learned that art could change the world, whether through the lens of a camera, a song, or a movement. This deep connection to her family's legacy, especially in terms of social and environmental activism, would continue to guide Mary throughout her career, inspiring the projects she would later undertake, both in photography and filmmaking. But more than that, it was the emotional lessons she learned from her parents, love, commitment, and the importance of family, that would fuel the artistic spirit that would define Mary McCartney's work. Mary McCartney's creative journey has been shaped by her diverse interests, all linked by a common thread: her deep love for expression through art. Though she grew up surrounded by the music and activism of her famous parents, her passion for photography was something that uniquely captured her attention. From a young age, Mary was drawn to the camera, seeing it as a way to preserve moments in time and tell stories that words alone couldn't. Her first major breakthrough as a photographer came in 2015, when she was entrusted with the incredible opportunity of photographing Queen Elizabeth II. Capturing the Queen, who at that time had become the longest-reigning British monarch in history, was not just a monumental professional achievement for Mary. It was a deeply personal one. The project carried significant weight. It was a moment for Mary to honor the legacy of a monarch who, like her father, had left an indelible mark on history. The image of Queen Elizabeth, captured through Mary's lens, wasn't just about a famous figure. It was about conveying a sense of grace, dignity, and the passing of time. This project was a clear demonstration of Mary's ability to capture the essence of her subjects, a skill she would continue to hone throughout her career. But Mary's creative vision didn't stop at photography. Her passion for music, nurtured by her father, led her to a new venture that would push her artistic boundaries further. In 2021, she directed the documentary If These Walls Could Sing, which explored the historic significance of Abbey Road Studios, the legendary space that had been at the heart of much of her family's musical legacy. The studio was more than just a recording space. It was a second home to Mary during her childhood. As a little girl, she wandered its iconic halls, unaware at the time of its immense impact on the world of music. With the documentary, Mary returned to Abbey Road with a new perspective, one informed by years of experience as an artist and filmmaker. She set out to capture not only the technical achievements of the studio, but also the emotional and personal connections that countless musicians have forged within its walls. The result was a piece that blended history with personal recollections, as Mary reflected on how the studio shaped the sound of the Beatles and the music world at large. Through interviews with music legends like Jimmy Page, Mary explored what made Abbey Road such a revered place in the hearts of artists. The documentary, created in honor of Abbey Road's 90th anniversary, not only showcased the stories of famous musicians, but also illuminated the deep emotional ties that many had to the studio. For Mary, it was a way to document her own memories, those early moments spent in a place that became part of her family's history. If These Walls Could Sing was much more than just a tribute to Abbey Road. It was a love letter to the music, the legacy, and the people who made it all happen. Alongside her work as a photographer and filmmaker, Mary has also made a name for herself in the world of plant-based cooking, a field that was inspired by her mother, Linda McCartney. Her mother's commitment to vegetarianism and animal rights was not just a lifestyle, it was a mission. Linda's cookbooks, which focused on vegetarian meals, were groundbreaking at the time, and Mary's own culinary ventures continued that mission. Through her cookbooks and her popular cooking show, Mary McCartney Serves It Up, Mary has shared her love for plant-based cuisine, blending creativity and activism in the kitchen. In 2012, Mary released her first cookbook, Food, Vegetarian Home Cooking, which featured recipes that embraced the McCartney family's philosophy of healthy, compassionate eating. A few years later, in 2015, she followed up with At-Home Feasts for Family and Friends, a collection of hearty meals designed to bring people together around the table. Both cookbooks were filled with dishes that celebrated flavors, textures, and a commitment to using wholesome, plant-based ingredients. Through her books, Mary hoped to inspire others to embrace a meatless lifestyle, not just for health reasons, but for the well-being of the planet. Mary's passion for plant-based living led her to create Feeding Creativity, a 2023 cookbook that expanded her influence in the world of culinary art. This book, filled with 60 plant-based recipes, was a celebration of both food and creativity, offering a glimpse into Mary's life as she cooked for her celebrity friends and shared the joy of plant-based meals with her audience. It was more than just a cookbook. It was a reflection of Mary's belief in the power of food to bring people together and inspire positive change. In addition to her cookbooks, Mary's television show, Mary McCartney Serves It Up, which premiered on Discovery Plus and Food Network in early 2021, further solidified her status as a voice in the plant-based culinary world. The show, which combined her love for food with her creative flair, was an instant hit, leading to a second season in November 2021 and a third season in 2023, November 2022. With star-studded guests and a warm, inviting tone, Mary brought her family's approach to cooking into the homes of viewers across the globe. In fact, the show's success earned Mary a Daytime Emmy nomination in 2022, cementing her ability to connect with audiences in a new, exciting way. Throughout all of her creative endeavors, Mary has remained deeply connected to her family's legacy. Whether through her work as a photographer, filmmaker, or cookbook author, Mary continues to honor the values instilled in her by her parents. From her father's musical genius to her mother's passion for compassionate living, Mary has woven those influences into every aspect of her life, using her platform to inspire others while paying tribute to the McCartney family's incredible legacy. Paul McCartney's journey to becoming one of the most influential figures in music history began in the humble streets of Liverpool. Born on June 18, 1942, Paul was raised in a working-class family where his parents, Jim and Mary, instilled values of hard work and perseverance. Growing up, Paul was surrounded by music, particularly from his father, Jim, who had once played in a jazz band. This early exposure to the sounds of jazz had a lasting impact on Paul's musical development, fostering his love for melodies and rhythm. While Paul's first experiences with music began with the piano, it was his natural curiosity and the desire to learn by ear that truly set him apart. Although his father tried to teach him formal lessons, Paul preferred to figure things out on his own, developing his own sense of musicality. At the age of 14, Paul started learning guitar, but what truly made him unique was his left-handed approach to playing. In an era when most guitarists were right-handed, Paul flipped the strings on his guitar, creating a style that was distinctly his own. This early innovation would go on to define his guitar technique and distinguish him in the rock and roll world. His commitment to learning by feel, along with his innate musical ability, laid the foundation for the groundbreaking music that he would soon create. It wasn't long before Paul's musical path intersected with that of another young talent, John Lennon. Their meeting in 1957 would change not only their lives, but the course of music history. Paul, initially impressed by John's guitar skills and songwriting, joined his band, the Quarrymen, as a rhythm guitarist. This collaboration would evolve over time, leading to the formation of the Beatles, with Paul playing a pivotal role in shaping the group's identity and sound. As the Beatles began to find their footing, they faced their share of struggles. However, their perseverance and dedication led to their breakthrough in 1960, when they made their first trip to Hamburg, Germany. This trip proved to be a pivotal moment in their journey. The long hours they spent performing in the clubs of Hamburg shaped their abilities and forced them to evolve as musicians. It was here, under the intense pressure of late-night performances, that the Beatles honed their stage presence and musical skills, preparing them for the success that would soon follow. The formation of the Beatles' iconic identity took time, but it was during this period of growth that they began to develop their sound. Their first single, Love Me Do, marked the beginning of their rise to fame. Despite its simple structure, the song captured the energy and charm that would define the Beatles' early years. As their popularity grew, so did their ability to innovate, turning what started as a local sensation into a global phenomenon. By the early 1960s, the Beatles were no longer just a band. They were a cultural movement, and Paul McCartney was at the heart of it. Paul's contributions to the band were essential, particularly his role in songwriting. Alongside John Lennon, Paul co-wrote some of the most iconic songs of the 1960s. Their early hits, such as I Want to Hold Your Hand, She Loves You, and Can't Buy Me Love, became anthems of the era, capturing the joy and excitement of youth while also pushing the boundaries of what pop music could be. While John often took the lead on many of the band's earlier tracks, Paul's melodic instincts and vocal harmony became crucial to the Beatles' signature sound. As the 1960s progressed, the Beatles began to experiment with new musical styles, and Paul played an increasingly important role in this creative evolution. The release of Yesterday in 1965 marked a turning point, as Paul's ability to craft deeply emotional ballads set the Beatles apart from other bands. The song, featuring only Paul's voice and an acoustic guitar accompanied by a string quartet, was a departure from the band's earlier, more upbeat songs. It showed a more vulnerable and introspective side of Paul's songwriting, one that would continue to evolve in the years to come. The release of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. In 1967 was another milestone in the band's musical growth, and it further solidified Paul's creative leadership. As the band moved away from traditional pop formats, they embraced experimental sounds, studio techniques, and more complex arrangements. Paul's contributions to the album were central to its success, with tracks like Penny Lane and Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, displaying his ability to blend intricate melodies with innovative production. The album became a defining moment in the history of rock music, and Paul's artistic vision was key to its success. However, as the Beatles reached new creative heights, tensions within the band began to surface. By the late 1960s, the internal dynamics of the Beatles started to shift, and Paul's growing creative control became a point of contention. As the band's sound became more experimental and introspective, the tension between Paul and John Lennon, as well as the other members of the band, began to surface. While Paul's drive for perfectionism pushed the band to new creative heights, it also led to frustration and conflict within the group. The period between the release of Sgt. Pepper and the band's final years was marked by a creative divide. Paul increasingly took on the role of the band's musical director, pushing for greater experimentation and innovation, while tensions around management and creative differences began to strain the group. It was during this time that Paul's personal life also began to play a role in the Beatles' evolution. His relationship with Linda Eastman, whom he married in 1969, became an important part of his journey both musically and personally. While the Beatles were working on their final album, Let It Be, it became clear that the band was nearing its end. By the time Paul announced his departure from the group in 1970, the band had already gone through significant changes. The breakup marked the end of an era, but it also signaled the beginning of Paul's solo career, which would see him continue to shape the musical landscape for decades to come. Despite the challenges and tensions within the Beatles, Paul McCartney's contributions to the band's success are undeniable. From the early days of songwriting with John Lennon to his leadership on albums like Sgt. Pepper, Paul's influence on the Beatles and on music as a whole was immeasurable. His ability to blend melody, harmony, and innovation set a standard for future generations of musicians and cemented his place as one of the most important figures in the history of popular music. As the Beatles entered the late 1960s, cracks began to appear within the band. Much of the growing tension could be traced back to the death of their manager, Brian Epstein, in 1967. Epstein had been the glue that held the band together, guiding their career and making important decisions about their business and public image. With his sudden passing, the Beatles were left to navigate their increasingly complicated relationships on their own. As the pressure mounted, the individual members of the band started to pursue their own creative paths, and it was Paul McCartney who felt the most urgent need for artistic freedom. Paul's desire to expand his musical vision led to friction with the rest of the band. While Paul was pushing for more ambitious and experimental projects, such as his work on Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, the other members of the band began to feel alienated by his growing control over the creative direction. John Lennon, in particular, began to distance himself from Paul's dominant influence, and the songwriting partnership that had once defined the Beatles started to break down. The once harmonious collaboration between John and Paul, which had been the heart of the band, became strained as both musicians sought more autonomy. This creative divide became increasingly evident in the band's final years together, particularly during the making of albums like Revolver, The White Album, and Let It Be. Each of these albums showcased the individual creative visions of the band members, but it was clear that the unified sound the Beatles were known for was beginning to fray. Tensions were palpable during the recording sessions, with disagreements over musical direction, production choices, and the band's overall approach. The White Album, for example, saw the band members contributing solo tracks and working separately, rather than as a cohesive unit. The once tight camaraderie was gone, replaced by an undercurrent of rivalry and frustration. By the time the band began recording Let It Be, the situation had become untenable. The album's production was marred by disputes between the members, and the film documenting its creation revealed the profound disconnect between the bandmates. The band's final album was a reflection of their fractured relationship. Though it contained some of their most iconic songs, it was also a clear indication that the magic of the Beatles was no longer there. Despite the tensions, Paul remained determined to continue working together, but the cracks in the foundation were too deep to repair. In 1970, Paul made the momentous decision to leave the Beatles. His departure came as a shock to the public, but behind the scenes, it had been an inevitability. With the band no longer able to function as a unit, Paul decided to strike out on his own. The breakup was not a clean one, however, and Paul's departure sparked a series of legal battles. The band's dissolution was officially set in motion by Paul's lawsuit against the remaining members, as he sought to break free from their shared legal and financial obligations. It was a painful and public end to what had once been the world's most successful and beloved band. The aftermath of the breakup saw the rivalry between Paul and John escalate. John, who had long been frustrated with Paul's creative dominance, released the song "How Do You Sleep" in 1971, a direct shot at his former bandmate. The song's biting lyrics were a public expression of the animosity that had developed between the two. John criticized Paul's music, his persona, and even took aim at his personal life. "How Do You Sleep" was more than just a song. It was a declaration of the deep rift that had formed between the two men. Paul, in turn, responded with his own musical jabs. In his song "Too Many People," Paul subtly criticized John's behavior and expressed his own frustration with their broken relationship. The tension between the two continued to simmer, and the public feud played out in the press and through their music. Both Paul and John used their songs to air their grievances, with each trying to assert their own creative vision and identity in the aftermath of the Beatles' collapse. The tension between the two would define much of their post-Beatles careers, with John's political activism and Paul's more accessible pop music standing in stark contrast to one another. Despite the bitter feud, the two men would eventually reconcile, but not before years of public and personal conflict. When John Lennon was tragically murdered in 1980, the world lost one of its greatest musical talents, and Paul was left to reflect on their relationship. While their rivalry was intense and their breakup marked the end of an era, it was clear that both John and Paul had shaped each other's lives in profound ways. The music they created together continues to resonate with fans around the world, but the story of their fallout serves as a reminder of how even the greatest bands are not immune to the pressures of fame, creativity, and personal differences. The "Paul is dead" conspiracy theory began to take hold in the late 1960s, sparking wild rumors that Paul McCartney had died in a car accident in 1966 and was secretly replaced by a look-alike. It started as an offhand remark in student newspapers and quickly snowballed into a full-fledged theory that gripped the public's imagination. The idea gained traction in 1969, fueled by supposed clues hidden within the Beatles' music and album covers, sparking widespread curiosity and speculation. The more fans searched for these clues, the more bizarre and intricate the theory became, claiming that the Beatles were sending hidden messages about Paul's death through their work. The origins of the theory can be traced back to a mix of cultural factors during the late 60s. The decade was a time of social upheaval, counterculture movements, and skepticism toward authority, creating an environment ripe for conspiracy theories to thrive. The Beatles, who were once the poster children for youth culture, had grown increasingly secretive. They withdrew from public appearances, and their music began to reflect more introspective and cryptic themes, further adding fuel to the fire. It was against this backdrop of mystery and shifting public personas that the "Paul is dead" theory emerged, combining the public's growing disillusionment with fame and the band's new, more experimental sound. The theory claimed that there were hidden messages in the Beatles' albums, particularly in songs like Strawberry Fields Forever, where fans believed they could hear phrases like, "I buried Paul," if they listened closely enough. The artwork for albums like Abbey Road and Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band was scrutinized for what some saw as further clues. The Paul is dead theory even pointed to the LMW 281F license plate on the white Beetle in the Abbey Road cover, which some fans interpreted as, "Paul is dead. Miss him. Miss him." These supposed signs, combined with the absence of Paul in certain Beatles photographs and the band's increasingly strange behavior, convinced many that something had happened to their beloved bass player. Why did this theory gain such traction? One reason lies in the power of myth-making during a time of cultural change. The Beatles, once accessible and relatable icons, had become increasingly enigmatic and distant, and their transformation from clean-cut pop stars to avant-garde musicians only deepened the mystery. Fans were desperate to find answers to the questions they had about their favorite band's evolution, and in the absence of clear information, the Paul is dead theory offered an explanation that seemed to make sense in a chaotic world. As the rumor spread, it created a media frenzy. People everywhere began dissecting every Beatles song, album cover, and public appearance, looking for hidden messages and supposed clues. The belief in the theory was not limited to just a few fans. It became a cultural phenomenon, particularly in the United States, where college students and conspiracy theorists held elaborate Paul is dead meetings and discussions. It was a theory that captured the imagination of an entire generation, adding to the mystique surrounding the Beatles during their final years together. Amidst the chaos, Paul McCartney took notice of the rumors. Instead of ignoring them or becoming defensive, Paul decided to address the theory with his characteristic humor and grace. In 1969, when the theory was at its peak, Paul gave an interview with Life magazine, where he openly mocked the whole idea. His response was lighthearted and witty, dismissing the rumors as absurd, while also playing along with the ongoing speculation. His sense of humor allowed him to take control of the situation, using it as a way to connect with his fans rather than distancing himself from them. While the Paul is dead theory was ultimately debunked, it became a significant part of Beatles lore and pop culture. The rumors persisted for years, fueling the growing mythology around the band. For Paul, it was a strange yet oddly endearing moment in his career. The theory became a quirky piece of Beatles history, and despite its absurdity, it was something Paul embraced as part of his ongoing relationship with the fans. Over the years, Paul would occasionally reference the conspiracy theory with a wink and a nod, making it clear that he was alive and well, but also recognizing the odd charm that the legend had taken on. The Paul is dead phenomenon speaks to the power of myth in pop culture and the deep connection fans have with artists. It's a testament to the Beatles' cultural impact that such a bizarre conspiracy theory could flourish in the first place. But it also highlights how the band, and Paul in particular, were able to navigate the chaos with a sense of humor and a deep understanding of the power of their influence. Whether it was real or not, the Paul is dead theory became part of the fabric of Beatles history, a wild and surreal chapter in the ongoing story of the most famous band in the world. In her 2021 documentary, If These Walls Could Sing, Mary McCartney took on a deeply personal project that allowed her to reconnect with a place that had been a part of her life since childhood: Abbey Road Studios. For Mary, Abbey Road wasn't just a legendary recording space, it was home. Growing up surrounded by the music that defined generations, Mary had early memories of running through its halls, unaware of its immense historical significance. The documentary became not just a celebration of the studio, but also a journey of rediscovery for Mary, as she explored its influence on both her family and the music world at large. Abbey Road Studios had always been a backdrop to her life, but through the lens of the documentary, Mary began to see it with fresh eyes. The project was a way for her to reflect on her childhood experiences, from the sounds of music that filled the air to the stories of artists who passed through the studio doors. As she interviewed legendary musicians who had recorded there, like Jimmy Page, Mary began to understand how Abbey Road wasn't just a space for creating music. It was a home where artists shaped their legacies. But more than that, it was a place where Mary's own family had created something everlasting. The film revealed a deeper, more personal connection to her parents, particularly her mother, Linda McCartney. Linda's presence at Abbey Road wasn't just as a spouse of one of the world's most famous musicians. It was as an artist in her own right, capturing moments with her camera and contributing to the spirit of the studio. For Mary, the documentary was an opportunity to discover her mother's own legacy in a space that had meant so much to her. She began to realize how deeply Linda's work had influenced her own path in photography and filmmaking. Mary saw the ways in which Abbey Road had played a part in shaping the McCartney family, not just musically, but emotionally and artistically as well. But beyond the studio's impact on her life, the documentary also gave Mary a new perspective on her father, Paul McCartney. If These Walls Could Sing allowed her to understand Paul not only as a musical icon, but as the man who had shaped the very culture of modern music. While Mary had always known Paul as her father, seeing him through the eyes of others, especially in the context of Abbey Road, helped her appreciate the full depth of his legacy. The interviews with other musicians and artists revealed how Paul had not only contributed to the Beatles' history, but also influenced the direction of music for decades. Through the project, Mary discovered a new connection to her father's music, gaining a more profound appreciation for his role in shaping the sound of the 20th century. Paul McCartney, the man she knew as her father, was also a pioneer whose work had transcended generations. The documentary allowed Mary to reconnect with the music that had been a constant part of her life, but in a way that was more emotionally resonant. It was as if the walls of Abbey Road had opened up new doors to understanding the power of the music he created, not just as a public figure, but as someone who had left a deep imprint on her family's story. In reflecting on her father's legacy, Mary also realized how much of his influence had shaped her own path as an artist. If These Walls Could Sing became more than just a documentary about Abbey Road, it was a window into her personal journey of understanding her father's significance, not only to the world, but to her own life. For Mary, the project was a chance to explore what it meant to be a part of such a monumental legacy. It was a way to bridge the gap between her personal memories and the broader cultural history that had been created within those walls. The documentary marked a pivotal moment in Mary's creative career. It wasn't just an artistic achievement, it was a powerful, emotional experience that helped her to see her family's place in music history in a new light. Through her journey with Abbey Road, Mary McCartney not only deepened her connection with her father and mother's legacy, but also gave the world a chance to see the profound impact of Abbey Road Studios on the music industry and on her own family's story. Paul McCartney's musical legacy is nothing short of extraordinary. As a founding member of the Beatles, his contributions reshaped the landscape of modern music, influencing countless artists and generations to come. His work, both as a member of the Beatles and as a solo artist, continues to resonate globally. Mary McCartney's work, especially through If These Walls Could Sing, offers a fresh, personal perspective on this immense legacy. By exploring Abbey Road Studios and reflecting on her family's place in music history, Mary has brought a new depth to her father's legacy, both creatively and emotionally. I encourage you to watch If These Walls Could Sing, as it unveils the intimate stories behind the music. Share your thoughts on your favorite Beatles tracks and Paul's lasting impact in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more captivating stories about music and its most influential figures.